Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome back to another StarCraft video. Now today we're gonna be watching the entirety of the final match of the World Championship Series of 2018 through the eyes of the new World Champion. Today we're gonna be discussing it from the perspective of Serral. Now before we nerd out about all of the decision making and the strategies and whatnot, let me try and paint the picture of how this match took place. So it was played very recently over at BlizzCon, and I was there in the audience as well, and let me tell you, it was absolutely packed. All seats in the audience were taken and people were literally crowding up through the aisles. Security were trying to like push people away because obviously it's a bit of a risk if the aisles are packed as well, and eventually they kind of managed to, but let me just say that it was extremely busy. On top of that, even though it was streamed at like a relatively terrible time, I believe, for the European audience, there were still hundreds of thousands of people watching online, and apparently the viewer numbers were up like 50% over what they were like last year, which is absolutely ridiculous as well. The thing is that for the very first time in like 20 years of StarCraft, and I think of like 10 years or so of a competitive season, we had the chance of a non-Korean as the World Champion of StarCraft 2. Up to very recently, the Korean players were always the one that were dominating, but Serral, being a young man from Finland, taking the crown, of course, was an extremely exciting moment. Now, leading up to this event, Serral had basically won everything he could participate in 2018. Other than WESG, which was really early on into the year, he's won everything. It's pretty ridiculous. So there was WCS Leipzig, Austin, Valencia, and Montreal. Those are the four premier events for the WCS circuit. So the 4 official events that Blizzard put out, and he won all of them. So really the only trophy that was still missing was BlizzCon. But obviously coming into the event, there was a stupid amount of pressure on Serral because so many people were expecting him to do really well. The other player that everyone was expecting to do really well was Maru, the Korean player, who won basically everything over in Korea, and he sort of just crumbled under the pressure, and he was eliminated rather early on into the tournament as well. Now, on top of that, besides just the honor of being the World Champion of StarCraft, of course, there's also a $280,000 prize pool for the very first place. I think it's $112,000 for the second place, so that's a pretty steep jump. And on top of that, before this game took place, Serral had won 3 in a row, and then Stats took 2 once again. Now, looking at the games, it was pretty obvious that Serral was starting to feel the heat. He won the first 3 games rather easily. However, the 4th and the 5th map, they looked a little bit sloppy, honestly. In one of the games, on Acid Plant, for example, it looked like Serral just sort of forgot that he had a bunch of Swarm House sitting out on the map, and it was just a little bit un-Serral-like, you know? He's very known for that clean playstyle, and in that particular match, he just looked a little bit more sloppy. So that is where we are right now. He had a chance of becoming the World Champion, the very first non-Korean, $280,000 as far as the prize pool goes, and then obviously a ridiculous amount of prestige as well, because no one has ever been able to do that before. Now, his opponent, Stats, is an absolute monster as well. Stats basically is you know, he's one of the most successful Protoss players of all time. I mean, if you've been watching StarCraft, you must know the man. He ended up winning a GSL event in 2018, and he's an absolute force to be reckoned with. So it was an epic finals, not gonna lie. Now, this game, I have never seen a pro gamer play as careful as Serral did. If you want to have like a textbook style on how to play the Zerg versus Protoss matchup extremely safely, I think this is kind of, you know, the way to go. I mean, he probably cut a couple corners, like for example the timing of the Roach Warren and like the Baneling Nest and all that. I'm not entirely sure at what point he takes that, but it is a very, very safe way of playing ZVP. Now, one final thing that I do want to point out as well is that Serral's Zerg vs Protoss is probably his strongest matchup. Leading up to this, in the round of 16 and I think the round of 8 of the World Championship Series, he ended up going up against Zest and against SOS. Once again, top-of-the-line Protoss players, and he 2-0'd both of them. And apparently in recent tournaments, his win rate, and get this, like against high-level players, his win rate against Protoss in recent tournaments is over 90%. Ridiculous. Now, one of the key characteristics, and you may have already noticed it in this game as well, of his Zerg vs Protoss, is that his scouting is very good. He got himself that Overlord speed early on, And he got those Zerglings inside of the main base there of the Protoss as well to confirm that indeed it was gonna be that Stargate play. But continuously throughout this series and throughout this match, you will see that he is gonna go for a stupid amount of scouting all the time. Right now he knows that there are indeed a bunch of adepts out on the map, but upon seeing that there may very well be an attempt right here for a third base, Serral decides to go for a whole bunch more drones right here as well. Now, in the previous matches of this series, this is the one build that Serral was struggling against quite a bit. And I was sitting right next to Lambo during the grand finals. Lambo apparently helped Serral pick the strategies that Serral decided to play during the grand finals, and Lambo had been accurate every time. For example, on Acid Plant, I believe it was Acid Plant anyway, Lambo said to me, okay, he's gonna make 10 swarm hosts right now. Not 12, not 14, 10. And he made 10 exactly. So Serral definitely did get some advice there from... You see that move right there? Like the drone being pulled there to the middle line? That was very strange, right? Like those are the kind of moments where you can see a player is kind of nervous. But anyways, Serral was apparently, according to Lambo, most nervous for this double Stargate opener that Stats is doing. Because if you're the Zerg player, even if your micro is really good, even if you get yourself 20 queens, and even though you can get yourself like 3 spore crawlers in every mineral line, usually you will still end up losing quite a lot of drones. And in one of the games that Serral lost, or actually maybe even both of the games that Serral lost in this event, against Stats that is, they were both, I think either one or two of them were against this double Stargate style. I know that Stats at the very least played it 3 times throughout the series, as it was very obvious that Serral was not feeling all too confident against this style. So basically, Lambo explained to me the way you play against this style is just by sort of assuming you're gonna lose drones, and you're just gonna overmake workers in the first place. You just keep scouting whether or not it's gonna be like an adept follow-up or like, you know, anything with charge slots or whatever. But you're just gonna continuously pile on as many drones as you can. You're gonna sneak out that 4th base. And you're just gonna make a stupid amount of workers. And you take into account, you take those losses as well. So basically he's just, you know, he's just accepting the fact that he's likely gonna lose like 10 to 20 or so drones here. And just overmaking workers just to lose them. Which may not sound as the most efficient way of playing it, but it does make sense because you can produce so many of them. And, you know, with Phoenixes being rather tanky and you being able to just simply, you know, you can see right here, right? You can just simply shoo away at them, but you can't really kill them very easily. Serral decided to go for a relatively greedy way of playing this one out. Now, this was a curious moment right here. So you see the timing right there? I'm going to take control of the camera for just a little bit. You see the timing right here of the Hive? That is something that Serral did not do yet up to this point. There's a couple different ways you can play this one out right here as a Zerg, right? So you know you're going to be playing that Hydraling Bane style. We see the Baling Nest here, researching the centrifugal hooks, and we see the Hydra upgrades. We know that there's a bunch of upgrades right here in the Evo chamber as well. Playing Hydraling Bane is 100% a really, really viable option. However, in this game, Serral decided to play extremely safe and go straight up into a Greater Spire. Now, Stats scouted this almost immediately, and obviously, but with the timing right here of the Hive and then also the Spire, it's very obvious that Serral wants to go for the Brute Lord tech. And upon seeing that, there's a couple different things that Stats can do. First off, Stats could go for a really, really big push and try to kill the Zerg player here before those Brute Lords are out. Basically, between the Spire finishing up and the Greater Spire finishing up and then like the Brute Lords coming out, there's like a couple of minutes of time, right? It takes a really, really long while. So there's quite a good timing window there for Protoss to just simply try and push for the victory. However, another option that Stats could do is go for a much more, I would say, like more laid back style where you go for that big Stargate based army yourself as well. And I think this is probably where Stats makes the main mistake in this game. So he scouts perfectly with the Phoenixes earlier that it is going to be this Greater Spire play. He does make a really large army, but these couple of Zerglings that Serral has moving across the map really do keep him in the game. So keep in mind, right, this strategy here that Stats is going for and the push that Stats wants to execute here is on a bit of a timer. There's a really big army right in the middle of the map. Stats needs to push up into a ramp, I suppose, if he really wants to, you know, test the waters here. But he knows that he's on a timer as well, because as soon as Brute Lords are out, I mean, that immortal Archon Ball is not really gonna do too much. But you can see, while this is going on, right, and your gut instinct as a Zerg player at this point is to try and scramble all of your units together, you can see that Serral is committing small amounts of units to run-bys and to little bits of aggression here and there. This was honestly one of the scariest moments in the game, and while it's really difficult to explain that pressure here, there's no denying that once Brute Lords are out, the Corruptors, you know, morphing into Brute Lords, as soon as they are out, you're gonna be in a really good spot if you're the Zerg player. But Serral making these small little run-bys, buying himself a lot of time, eventually does manage to get those Brute Lords out before this big Immortal Archon ball can really go across the map. So there's 5 workers right here going down in total. A couple Zerglings are continuously trying to pick up the 4th as well. They never really are able to do so, but at this point... That was a nice connection, but at this point, the Brute Lords are out. And this is where the game becomes a lot more interesting. So stats, I would probably describe him as being one of the most standard Protoss players you can find. He's extremely good at playing the macro game. And playing the late game against someone of the caliber of Stats is really difficult. Stats does not mind playing the late game. He's very good at playing the late game, and he doesn't usually fail in those kind of scenarios. Now Serral, upon going for that Brute Lord tech, is basically saying, hey, you know what? I'm gonna try and see if I can test the waters here. Now the Brute Lords are spotted, so eventually that Archon Immortal army is gonna have to turn around. There's no denying about that. But this was the moment where I personally started getting a little bit excited as well, because this game was pointing as if it was going towards the late game. Now, obviously, Serral could still decide at this point to go for like a really big push out with the Brute Lords as well. But usually, in my experience, that's not something you really want to do because of this thing that we already see on the production tab. Tempest are queued up here at the perfect moment for Stats as well. And he's really trying to counter these Brute Lords just by going for a lot of those Tempests. Once you get enough Tempest out, you can basically start one-shotting those Brutes. You get an Oracle out, you tag the Brute Lords, and then you just pick them off with the long range of the Tempest, and it's very difficult to get the proper damage in if you are the Zerg. If you're trying to fight that Protoss army and they just simply keep running away, you lose a couple Brute Lords along the way because of the Tempest, and eventually you just simply get overwhelmed. So instead, we see Serral now being forced into that extremely defensive position, and he's gonna be playing this one out for much longer than I would imagine anyone feeling comfortable. One of the really cool things that I think is indicative of this style that he likes to play is that he goes for a lot of static defense, he goes for a lot of Brute Lords, and he goes for a lot of Corruptors and Vipers here eventually as well, but he's always got a small army of Zergling, Hydra, Bane roaming the map to get that damage in. And this is the interesting moment, right? So if I take control of the camera once again for just a little bit, you can see that there's like lines of static defense being set up. There's nothing really over here just yet, but there's lines of static defense being set up everywhere. And this is not all too crazy on like a smaller map, like for example Fracture. But on a really big map like this, right? This is basically Serral saying, hey, you know what? If Protoss wants to take 8 bases, be my guest. I will try and slow it down with the Zerglings and the Hydras and the Banelings and all that. But Protoss, in all honesty, right now, with this much static defense going down and this many Brute Lords, they should be allowed to take as many bases as they would properly like to. And obviously, you know, Protoss being allowed whatever economy they like, they usually will be going for that Carrier, Mothership, High Templar, Archon, Tempest-based Stargate army, right? And obviously, if there's one thing bad against flying units, it's gonna be Brute Lords. So it's a bit of a slippery slope here, and I think that Serral played this one out absolutely brilliantly. Now, this is also one of the absolute safest games a man can possibly play. It's a little bit ridiculous. Like, this is an extremely safe game. There's very little risks being taken, and I think that must be because of the fact that Serral already lost 2 games here at this point in a row. After being very dominant in the first 3 games, he ended up losing the next 2, and it just looked a little bit more sloppy. But you can see right here, he's positioning those Brute Lords and Corruptors in the middle of the map. Where is he? He's continuously adding on more and more Spore Crawlers, and he's moving them around as well to try and get that positioning in. So he's like, okay, Protoss, you can engage me if you like, but you're always going to be fighting on top of a bunch of these Spore Crawlers, and obviously that's not really what you want to do. Now here you do see those revelations coming out. Beautiful feedbacks actually there by Stats as well, getting some of those queens. The Queen's trying to transfuse those Brood Lords after the Tempest ended up shooting at them as well. But while this is always going on, and I think this is really remarkable, right? There's this really big Protoss army at your front door. While this is going on, like 20 to 30 or so supply is always committed to fight somewhere else. And the funny part is that at this level of play, it looks like that is actually the army that is making the difference. Sure, this army here from Protoss is terrifying, but somehow Serral found it okay to commit 11 Hydras to the other side of the map, and it's actually now forcing the mass recall. These are the moves that really separate like high-level players to like top-of-the-line players. Making that decision to commit like 30 supply for the counterattack feels really backwards, because obviously you feel like you're gonna need it in the main fight, but instead it's now forcing the Protoss player to go back home. And this is finally when the Brood Lords start making a bit of a move for it as well. So the Brood Lords are roaming across. Serral at this point knows that the majority of that Protoss army is caught on the other side, right? He just forced a mass recall to the other end as well. Once again, though, the Protoss army is making a move right now on the left-hand side. That base should be relatively easy to pick up. The Brood Lords, once again, are heading back home. So if we have a look right here, the Brood Lords are heading back home. And then once more, the Hydra Baneling Zergling Ball is making its way towards the other side of the map. Serral even decides to just simply give up on that low ground to try and go for another base of the Protoss instead. So this is another one of those pretty high-level moves, where we see the Hydras being committed to the counterattack once again. They're trying to see whatever damage they can do. Great micro there, by the way. But while this is all going on, right, there's that really big Protoss army right at the front door. And while one base ended up going down, it was pretty much already mined out anyway, and Serral decides to give it up in favor of a much more powerful Protoss base here. Now, this is a cute moment. I remember this one. The crowd, well, went nuts at this point, right? Almost the Nexus ends up falling. And you're like, okay, there's absolutely nothing, right? Even a Zealot Warpin wouldn't stop this Nexus from falling right now. And then the Mothership spawns right on top of it. Now, Serral notices, hey, wait a second, the Mothership spawned. Let me just abduct that and get rid of that thing right at this point. And that's an extremely expensive unit to produce. Obviously, not only is it like 400 minerals, 400 gas, but it's also, you know, it takes like 20 minutes or so to produce, it feels like. I mean, whenever I make a Mothership as Protoss, it takes like 4.5 years. And even though Serral just now killed the Mothership, right? He still decides to take it extremely, extremely carefully. Pushing forward that creep slowly but surely to reposition some of those Spore Crawlers on the creep as well. He does want to go for at least a little bit of aggression here. Maybe abduct some of those units. There we go. Great abduct. Getting himself a carrier for free. But in a way, right? This entire strategy of Serral is basically based around like containing the Protoss player on like 7 bases. Which sounds so ridiculous in my head because Protoss can produce whatever they like on 7 bases, right? But if you manage to eventually bleed them out, they're gonna run out of resources at some point. They're gonna have to take more risky bases. And if you trade more cost efficiently, eventually you're gonna be in an absolutely phenomenal spot. So if you have a look right now at the units lost tab, you can see that Zerg has been very, very cost efficient. Sure, a lot of Zerglings and Banelings and whatnot went down, but the Protoss can't really push for the victory right now just because of the sheer amount of static defense that has been set up already. So it's pretty intense. And the longer that this game goes on, the more that little units lost step, I suppose, will go in favor of the Zerg player. And it's really, really difficult to pull that off. I mean, if you played StarCraft 2 yourself, you kind of know how easy it is to lose these units, right? I mean, Storm, it deals a flat amount of damage. It doesn't care about the amount of armor upgrades you have. Vipers can easily pick up a lot of these big flying units as well, but with proper control, the feedback, of course, can be absolutely enormous as well. Well, there we go. A couple of units do get picked off right now. This is one of the most aggressive moves that Serral makes in the entirety of this match. He's gonna try and pick off as much as he can, and eventually Stats is gonna be forced back home again as well. But closing it out after taking these kind of leads is difficult as well, because there's a lot of static defense set up as well for Stats. And while once again, right, Protoss ended up losing a bunch of bases, Serral scouts for a second here and realizes, wait a second, there's only really a handful of bases remaining right now for Protoss. I'm gonna go back. And I wonder how many of us would have been in this moment right here and would have just simply gone for the kill, right? And that's the risky move to make. Going back home once again with those Brute Lords after you just killed like 2 bases worth of economy is a very tough call to make. Now the reason though why Serral does it is because he assumed there was gonna be another base somewhere out on the map. He looked around with those Zerglings, and before he found it, the Brute Lords were already back headed home, but he did find another Nexus there in the bottom left-hand corner. And I think if he would have pushed up the ramp there towards the natural, it's probably like an 80% chance for him to win. But it's not 100%, right? And obviously, if you're 3-0 ahead, then it goes 3-2. If you then lose that 6th game as well, all of a sudden, momentum is way in favor of your opponent, and it's so difficult to get a good game going then in the absolute final match. So whatever is going on here, Serral is trying his very hardest to just not lose it. He's trying his very hardest to play as cautious as he possibly can. Now, Zerglings and Banelings, once again, moving forward. That's a lot of Banelings this time around. Once again, those stats are really good here with the control. And you can see both players, right? Losing a lot of workers here in the grand scheme of things. Continuously more and more go down. It's already almost 100 here combined. And neither of them really at this point is remaking a lot of those workers either. So if you look right now at the bank, you can see that while Stats does have some minerals and some gas there still ready to be spent, it's Serral who's sitting on a maxed out army, and he's mining quite a bit, and he's slowly starting to build up that bank more and more. It's really gas that you carry about at this point, because you can get yourself infestors and vipers and all that as well. It's just that with one miscontrol, this game can be over, you know? Like, if you accidentally miscontrol your Vipers for a split second, or you accidentally miscontrol your Brute Lords, or you just don't have them in the correct position, or you just overextend a little bit and storm hit your army, it's game over. And with the amount of moving particles, or moving armies, I suppose, for both players here, it's very difficult to properly micro the inevitable engagement, because obviously you're mining, or rather you're controlling so many different armies at once. The amount of hotkeys you need just to properly pull it off is very, very, very difficult. The burrows and the Baneling run bys. But you see what I mean though? Like, it's really the Banelings and the Zerglings and the Hydras that are dealing the damage. Both players have this big army, but it's like the Zealot run-bys and the Lings and the Hydras and the Banelings that are dealing the damage. Which is kind of funny. Like, both players have sort of like decided to max out. Or I guess Stats right now is not maxed out, but I guess Serral at this point, he has decided not to max out on just more Corruptors and more Brute Lords. He's always left, you know, 20 to 30 or so supply here for just Zerglings and Banelings. Couple of Banelings headed towards every single mineral line, and Serral's trying his best to bleed them dry. Now that is a lot of those carriers. Immediately, Stats is showing where his army is at, and Serral decides to move forward. Manages to get the abduct on one of those carriers, and once again, gets the kill there. Queens are pushing forward the creep as well. I also want to like compliment here how quickly Serral is replacing so many of those creep tumors, and how he's like putting down so many new ones as well, right? So many players will get, you know, distracted with the amount of actions here. And speaking of actions, let's have a look at the average APM. Now look at the average APM here for a second. That is 461 actions per minute on average in the last 23 minutes. You see him spiking up to 500-600s? Now I don't even want to do the math there, but that's like 10 buttons a second. It's honestly like, when you just think about it, it's extremely difficult to do. Like, it's not even like, it's not like Serral's thinking about actions, right? It's not like he's thinking about like trying to get his APM up. He doesn't care about APM. He's just trying to do all the things that he needs to do. And sure, some of those actions may be wasted, but I can tell you that like at least 70% or so will be useful. It's a pretty ludicrous amount of things that he's trying to manage right now at once, and I'm honestly really, really impressed, because there's no denying that Stats is continuously trying to slow down the Zerg as well, right? And you can see that while some players in the past have been really good and they've been able to like push back some of the Koreans, Serral is doing so in just a really straight up manner. He's not doing anything gimmicky, he's not cheesing, he's not doing anything strange. He's just simply playing a solid, straightforward game, right? He's just simply outplaying these top-of-the-line players, and it's just, yeah, it's really sick. You know the best part? I didn't realize this until later that night after BlizzCon wrapped up. and people were trying to, like, you know, buy some drinks and whatnot for Serral. Serral is not even, like, he didn't want any drinks because he's not even, I think he just turned 21, but it's pretty insane. Like, he's 20 years old at the time of this grand finals, and yeah, if he wants to, he can do this for like another 10 years, right? And I you know, now that, like, he's already won everything, if he wants to do it again, I can imagine the pressure is probably off, right? Like, it's at least not nearly as scary if you have to win it a second time around. I can't imagine. I don't know. He doesn't really seem to be a player who gets nervous anyway, but anyway, look at the control though, and look at the cautious play. Once again, he doesn't want to engage. He's just trying to kill the bases here. Once again, Zerglings are going to town there on one of those Nexi. Zerglings are also roaming around the map. More and more Spore Crawlers want to go down here as well. He doesn't want to fight this army without the Spore Crawlers present. And slowly but surely, Stats is starting to make a bit of a move for it. Now he tests the waters. He tries to see if there's any like hole in the defense right here of Serral. If there's like a kink in the armor of Serral here, but there's nothing. Like, units are always coming in. Pylons are being picked off. Zerglings are just trying to deal a little bit of damage here and there. And eventually, right, Zerg is going to be able to go up to that 3-3-3 army for the flying units as well. Once again, the army overextends just a little bit. Serral decides to back up, and he's trying to see whatever damage he can do. Using those Spore Crawlers to heal up this army as well, and or I guess get energy on that army once again, but Zerglings is just always coming through continuously. It's just so many workers that fall down. You can see Stats right now. He's starting to get a little bit anxious. You can notice that in his movement, right? He's mining out the bases that he had. He's mined like 6 of them fully. Mothership once again gets picked up, and once you realize that there's enough Corruptors to one-shot the Mothership, all of a sudden things look very, very grim here for the South Korean Protoss. And even though, of course, he does still have that scary army. Look at the bank. Look at the amount of resources that are still in the bank here. Serral can go ahead and remax here relatively easily. And right now, with those carriers being left alone, and the majority of the High Templar... Oh my god, even the split on the Corruptors. I did not realize that, but... Stats eventually is forced to GG out, and Serral, in an extremely cautious game, is the one who obtains the victory in the grand finals of BlizzCon, and thus became the new world champion of StarCraft. Is it obvious I'm a bit of a Serral fanboy? Is it obvious? Because I think it is well deserved. We have never really seen a player play this solidly, and never really seen a player take games off of Koreans this convincingly. Sure, we had players like, you know, we have players like, for example, Neep, like, for example, Scarlet, like, for example, Stavano back in the day, like, for example, Special. Like, there's so many great players out there. But Serral definitely takes the crown. He definitely takes the crown. He's just been getting better, and it's exciting to see where he's going to take this in 2019, because he's just playing better than anyone else. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, make sure you hit the like button down below. And if you want to see more, hit that sub button. You get notifications as soon as future videos go live. A special shout out to the Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. But for now, I want to thank you for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, alright? And I will see you once again in the next one.